So listen, AI companies love telling us how much their models can remember. 100,000 tokens, 200,000 tokens, a million tokens. You could put an entire book series in there, research papers, documents, long conversations, maybe most of an entire project. And obviously, that's going to sound impressive. But I also think that that number can give people a false sense of hope and security, because a massive context window does not automatically mean that the AI knows what information is current, what's valid. It doesn't necessarily know which idea you might have approved or which one you rejected, or what changed somewhere along the way. And that's where information can go completely wrong. And it's actually the part that seems a little backwards. Because the more information you keep adding, the more conflicting versions the AI may eventually have to choose from. So think about it kind of like this. Imagine you built this enormous warehouse and it can hold a million different items. Sounds great. Thing is, nobody decided to create a reliable system for inventory. Old products don't get removed. Rejected prototypes are sitting beside the actual real products. So yeah, the warehouse did definitely get bigger, but the operation didn't get smarter. And under the wrong scenarios, giving the AI more context can actually make the answers less reliable. So in this video, I want to show you why that happens, and then we'll go through a really simple kind of example. I'll show you a couple things that you can do to keep a longer AI project from slowly going off the rails into what's called context rot. So let's get into it right now, because this is extremely important for you to know moving forward with how things are happening with AI. So let's move on to it. Okay, so first off, I'm gonna share my screen and go over this thing. So before we get too far into this, we should probably clear up what a context window actually is. Because I think when most of us hear the word context, we think of memory. Like the AI remembers the conversation the same way you or I might remember a conversation. But that's not exactly what's happening. A context window is basically the information the model has available while it's creating the next answer, right? So that could include the message you just sent, parts of the earlier conversation, instructions that were running behind the scenes, information from documents you uploaded, results returned by tools. And then as the AI creates its answer, that answer becomes part of what it has to work from and work with as well, right? So when a company says a model has a million token context window, what they're actually saying is the model can potentially work with a very large amount of information at one time, which is useful, right? I'm not saying a large context window is bad. They're not. The problem is what we assume that number means, because the number mostly tells us how much information can potentially fit inside that area, right? It doesn't tell us whether that information is organized. It doesn't tell us whether all of it is still correct. And it definitely does not guarantee that the AI is going to grab the right piece of information when it's going to respond to us, right? Now, with that, we should also probably talk about tokens for just a second, because this is what the context window is actually measuring, what it's actually using. The AI doesn't really read text as complete sentences and paragraphs or anything the same way that we do. Before the model processes the text, that text gets broken into smaller pieces called tokens. And a token might be a complete word. It might be part of a longer word. It could be punctuation. Sometimes even spaces and formatting affect how the tokens get broken apart. So you don't really need to know exactly how every word gets divided. The important part is that the context window, that number is counting those pieces. So your prompt takes up tokens, right? The conversation, the history also takes up tokens. But the basic idea is the same. The context window is the amount of all of the tokenized information the model can actually play with while it's actually working with you and your prompt. Then the model begins creating that actual response. It predicts one token, then the next one, and the next one. And each new piece, that's generated based on the information available before it. And all of these pieces are not automatically labeled. Well, this is current, or this is what was rejected. This is only an example. That is the part that we still have to manage, right? So what I want to do also is explain another part of this that's kind of easy to miss. You see the whole conversation right here. So you're thinking, well, the AI can see all this too, right? But that's not necessarily what's happening. Depending on the app, it might take some of the older stuff and shorten it. It might pull in only certain parts of a document, or it might leave something out completely. So you might scroll back and say, no, wait, look, I told you it's right here. And you did. But that doesn't mean that the model had the exact piece of information in front of it when it gave you that answer, right? And even if it did, that still doesn't mean that it knew that was part of it, or that was the part that it was supposed to use, right? So there are really two possible issues here, right? Was the information actually available? And if it was available, did the AI recognize what it meant and use it correctly? And those are not the same problem. This is basically where context rot starts to actually show up. The longer the conversation gets, the more stuff the AI has to actually go through. Things like all those old instructions, new instructions, ideas that you were throwing out there. So after a little while, you start noticing some drift, some issues in the actual conversation. One of the requirements that you gave it early suddenly is nowhere to be found. And you're sitting there thinking like, what the hell are you doing? We went over this already. Like this is done. And when it gets really bad is when it continues making the same mistake, no matter how many different ways you try to word the prompt or iterate it to get the conversation back on track, right? Now, the interesting part is that the correct information might still be in there. The AI is just not using it correctly anymore. And it doesn't always have to hallucinate some brand new answer to mess things up. Sometimes it just picks the wrong piece of information that was already sitting inside the conversation. So let's make this really simple, right? Let's say that we're working on a product and early on in the conversation, I tell AI, the approved price is $49. That seems clear enough, right? But then later, while we're thinking about it, while we're brainstorming, maybe I say, could we experiment with $35 or $39? Haven't approved anything. I'm just throwing the idea out there to kind of see what would happen, right? Then maybe I say, okay, write an example using the $39 so that I can kind of see what this looks like. So the AI does its thing. It writes a sample. I look at it and I decide, you know what? I don't like it. So I say, forget it. Forget that idea. We're going to go back to the original $49. Now, as a person, as a human, this seems pretty obvious. The final approved price is back to $49. The $39 idea that came up, well, we tested it, we turned it down, pretty much the end of story. But look at what is still sitting inside the conversation. 49 is in there, 39 is in there. An instruction telling the AI to write something using $39 is also in there. And then another instruction telling it to go back to $49 is also in there. And all of it is inside that same conversation, that same warehouse. But those statements do not all mean the same thing, right? Only one is the real decision, where the other ones were suggestions or experiments, right? The problem is that a normal conversation does not automatically turn itself into a clean little database that says, okay, current approved price, $49. The AI has to look through the conversation and figure out which decision survived, right? Now imagine this happening hundreds of times inside a project. Old outlines, new outlines, ideas you tested, ideas you abandoned, right? Research that later turned out to be wrong. All of it is still sitting there in that million context window. So the problem is not necessarily that the correct answer is missing, right? It's basically the correct answer may be sitting beside 5 other answers that look almost exactly like it. And this is also something that researchers have called lost in the middle. And the name pretty much explains the idea. Sometimes information buried somewhere in the middle of a really long context is not used as reliably as information placed closer to the beginning or the end of the context. And that doesn't happen every single time. And newer models are getting better at this than the older ones. But the larger point here still does matter, right? Saying, I know the information is somewhere in there is not really a good standard for it being reliable, right? Imagine I gave you a warehouse with 10 boxes. Finding the correct one probably is not that hard. But now I give you a warehouse with 10,000 boxes, and several of them have almost identical labels and numbers on them. The correct box can still be in there, doesn't mean that it's going to be selected by you every single time. And this is where I think that people sometimes oversimplify what that retrieval process actually looks like. Retrieval is basically the system finding and bringing back the information that seems relevant to what you're asking. But even if the correct information gets found, it doesn't mean that the job is finished. The AI still has to figure out what that information represents. Is this current? Was it rejected? Does it belong to this product or some other product? And then it has to use all of that correctly in the final response. There's one thing that can still make this worse. The AI's own answers become part of the conversation as well. So let's say that the AI gets a launch date wrong, right? Let's say the real date is August 15th, but for whatever reason, the AI chooses August 1st. Then you ask it to summarize the project. Now, August 1st is actually in that summary, right? Then you go and use that summary to create an email, but August 1st gets put in that email. Then you use the email and the summary to create a timeline. So the same wrong date is sitting in 3 or 4 different places now. But now the AI keeps seeing August 1st over and over again. So the original mistake has become context for the next mistake, right? So let's go back to the pricing example for a moment, right? We have all 4 statements sitting inside that chat. The approved price is $49. Maybe we should have tried $39. Write an example using $39. No, rejected, go back to $49. Then much later, we ask it, write the final checkout page paragraph using the approved price. Now, maybe the AI gets it right. It might use $49, right? But it could also use $39. It could mention both. It might ask you to clarify. The point is not that the AI is guaranteed to fail every single time. The point is that we're making it dig through the history of the conversation and try to reconstruct what happened, right? We're basically saying, here are all the decisions, the experiments, the corrections, the reversals. Now you figure out which one is real. And then we act surprised and shocked when it grabs the wrong ones. So question is, how do we fix that? It's not by saying, please remember the price is $49 another dozen times or half a dozen times, because now we're just throwing more boxes labeled $49 into the same warehouse. So we need to make the current source of truth or the current truth easier for the AI to identify and understand. So the first thing that I would do is create what I call an anchor stack. And this is really just 3 pieces of information, right? How should the AI operate? Where does the project currently stand now? And what exactly are we asking it to do right now? And that's it. Those are the 3 anchor stacks, right? The first part is the operation instructions, right? The second part is the current project snapshot. And the third part is the current task contract, I guess you can say. Now, the operating instructions tell the AI how it should treat the information that we give it. So we might say, treat the current project snapshot as the source of truth, as the authoritative source. And all authoritative means right here is that this is the version we've agreed to treat as the current, most up-to-date version, right? That's basically the operating procedure for the warehouse. We're telling it how the inventory should now be actually handled. Then we create the current project snapshot. And honestly, this is probably the most important part of this entire thing, right? A current project snapshot is not just another summary of the conversation. That difference really matters. The snapshot is the current state of the project. And here's a prompt that you could use to create one, right? Create a current project snapshot from everything we've discussed so far. Do not give me a general summary of the conversation. I only want the current state of the project. Organize it into a current goal, approved decisions, required facts and constraints, rejected or superseded ideas, unresolved questions or conflicts, information that should not be used. And the next task, treat something as approved only when it's explicitly approved. A newer mention does not automatically replace an earlier decision unless the conversation clearly says that it does. If instructions conflict or you're uncertain about the current decision, do not guess, label it needs confirmation. Keep the snapshot concise, specific, and easy for me to review and correct, right? The line I really want you to notice is this. Do not give me a general summary of the conversation, because we don't want a recap of every idea we've talked about in this conversation. That's going to bring all the same noise right back into the new context. We want the current state. What did we actually approve? What did we reject or replace? What is still unresolved? What should not be used? Right? Now, this prompt, I'm going to admit right now, it's not magic. The AI can still misunderstand something while it's creating the snapshot. It might put an idea under approved when you never actually approved it. It could miss a decision. It might decide that a newer comment replaced an older decision when it really didn't. So the first snapshot the AI creates, think of it like a draft. You should look at it, correct it, remove anything that doesn't belong, right? And then say, this is the corrected snapshot. This is now the authoritative project state. Now at that point, you have something much more useful than the entire messy conversation. You have a short document that tells the AI what's actually true right now, what the source of truth is at this moment. right? Hopefully this is making sense, right? And you should update that snapshot whenever you make a decision that is important, that's meaningful, because not every single message matters. But when it comes to something important, you should update and change the actual snapshot, right? The third part is the current task contract, right? And contract might sound more technical than it really is, kind of like I mentioned before. It's basically just a clear brief for the current job. So maybe it says like, write a 50-word checkout page paragraph. Use the approved $49 price. Do not mention the rejected $39 price or any earlier experiments, right? Now the job is clear. The operating instructions tell the AI how to work. The current project snapshot tells it where the project stands. And the task contract tells it what needs to be done right now. How should you operate? What is true now? What are we doing next? That's the anchor stack, okay? And before I let it write the final paragraph, I might add one more tiny step. I would ask it to restate what it thinks is true. What is the approved price, right? What price was rejected? What rule are you following? Do you see any conflicts, right? So the AI comes back and says, well, the approved price is 49, rejected price is 39. Rule, use only the approved $49 price. The conflicts, there's none. Now, is that proof that the AI completely understands everything? No, not really, right? But it gives me something and gives you something that I can look at before it starts to create that final answer, which is really, really important. So you don't have to keep going back and forth, right? If it says the approved price is 39, well, then I know we have a problem. And I know that before it writes an entire sales page or email around the wrong price or the wrong information. If it correctly says 49, then we can actually move forward, right? And now the final paragraph uses 49. We didn't have to give the AI a larger context window, right? We didn't have to tell it to try harder. We just improved the way the information was organized and labeled. We made the current truth easier for it to understand, easier to identify, right? The second thing that I would probably do is stop using one giant conversation for every part of the project. This is important. And I know people like to do this, and that's why I mention it, right? You start doing some research, then you create an outline, then you start drafting, you edit the draft, then you ask it to fact check something. Before you know it, that same chat has become the researcher, the strategist, become the writer, the editor, the fact checker. Everything is contained in one place, which more or less feels easy. It feels more convenient that way. But every new phase is also inheriting all the crap that was left over from the phase before it. So instead of dragging the entire warehouse into every room, give each room the materials that it actually needs, right? Now, again, I'm not saying the context should always be as short as possible. That can create a different problem. If you leave out something important, the AI is and probably going to fail, right? Because the goal is not tiny context. The goal is enough context, the right context, and context that is clearly labeled correctly, right? Now, the third part is checkpointing. And I want to clear up something here because snapshot and checkpoint may sound like two different documents. They don't have to be. The current project snapshot is the document. Checkpointing is the act of stopping, reviewing it, and then updating the actual snapshot. So whenever you reach a real phase change, when something big happens, create a checkpoint. Research is finished. And before you start planning, update the snapshot. Planning is finished. And before you begin drafting, update it again. That becomes the clean handoff into the actual next phase. The reset gets rid of some of that accumulated mess, right? But there is a trade-off. When you reset the conversation, you may also remove some useful information. So the quality of that new context depends on the quality of the snapshot that you bring into it, right? Hopefully this is making sense because a bad snapshot creates a bad reset, right? A good snapshot gives you a much cleaner starting point without losing the decisions that actually matter here, right? And then before you create something important, verify the basics, the current goal, the approved decisions, anything that was rejected, any conflicts, the criteria, right? Anything you can check directly, check it directly. Words that should not appear, claims that need sources, you can absolutely use AI to help review the work, but one AI agreeing with another AI does not automatically make something true, right? So to kind of go over this is the complete process, right? First, you take the existing project and ask the AI to create a current project snapshot, not a general summary, a snapshot of the current state of the project, right? What's been approved, what's been rejected or replaced, what facts and constraints are required, what's still unresolved. Obviously, you get it, right? What are we doing next? Then you want to review that snapshot yourself, because it's not necessarily true because AI created it. It becomes authoritative after you correct and approve it, right? Not just when the AI said it's correct. Because after that, you want to move to the verified snapshot, the relevant source material and the current objective into the next phase. Give the AI a clear task contract, right? What are we creating? What should it use? What should it leave out? What should the output look like? Then have it restate the important parts before it begins and check the final output against the snapshot when it's finished. The big thing is this: don't let the conversation become the only place where the current state of your project exists, okay? Because once the chat becomes the project record, the brainstorming space, the rough draft, the editing room, and the source of truth all at the same times, all within the same context window, all within the same conversation, it's going to get messy, it's gonna get sloppy, and that's when things are gonna start screwing up pretty bad. So the solution is not to keep telling the AI to remember harder, right? The solution is to manage what is true, what's the authoritative information there. So create a current project snapshot, separate the work into different phases, right? Checkpoint the project before you move on. Verify the things that actually matter. Don't just ask, is the information somewhere in this conversation? Ask instead, can the AI clearly identify which information is correct, which information is authoritative, and what is it supposed to do with it right now? Because those are two completely different things, right? And I want you to understand that, right? So hopefully this all makes sense. And if it did, I want you to let me know. If you want me to expand on this and provide you with some more examples, then please let me know. And if this is not entirely clear to you why this is so important, please go back and watch those areas again. You'll understand what I mean watching it a second time. It's the way that I actually like to watch some of my favorite movies, right? Is I watch it the first time, I understand it. Next time I go into it, I see all the different nuances that I might have missed. And the movie ends up usually getting a lot better. It's kind of the same thing with this. I'm not telling you to watch it over again so I get more watch time. I'm telling it to you because it might sound a little strange right now or a little bit convoluted, but once you watch it again and kind of go through, it's going to make a lot more sense. So with that, if you do want me to do a follow-up video on this to kind of show you some more examples and things like that, please let me know in the comments. It's very important that I do know that so that I know what to actually create for you guys and build and show you. But other than that, I hope this was useful. I hope it makes sense to you. I hope that you go out and really use this and see how much more of a benefit you're going to have because of this. But other than that, this is Craig. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you on the next video. Take care.